that makes the case, right? Here's this, if you want to say the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poor, here's what you're going to point to, right? Well, look, 1975 to 1997, okay? 6 percentage points more to the wealthiest, and about a percentage point, a little less, under a percentage point less to the lowest 20%. Aha, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. The bottom line there shows the average gain in income for those two groups, right? And you can see the poor did get a little richer. That's right there, that's the ninth of the bigger pie. Not very much. Right, just a little bit. So that's not very persuasive. If I was you, listening to me, I'd say, okay, well, $207 is not very persuasive. You're right. But let's look at the mobility question. Okay? What this is data from 1979 to 1988 from the U.S. Treasury based on some income tax returns. I'm going to step out of the camera frame here for just a second. Sorry, Rick. What this does is it says if you started in 1979 in the bottom 20%, okay? What percentage of those in the bottom 20% in 1979 were in each of these categories in 1988? And you can see those who started in the bottom 20% in 79, 14%, and I would say only 14%, were still in the bottom 20% in 1988. 85.8%, everything in purple, were people who started poor in 79 and moved up at least a quintile. Notice, some of them moved all the way to the top, right? 14.7% moved all the way into the top 20. Most of them moved into the broad middle class. All right? So 85% who started poor are no longer poor. Okay, go ahead and hit, Rick, I'll stay here and hit the next one. This one, stop, don't hit the next one yet. Okay? This is 1975 to 1991 study from the University of Michigan, my alma mater, and that well-known bastion of free market thought. That's sarcasm. Okay. The panel study on income dynamics, which is one of the most used data sets in social sciences, they track households over time. Okay? In your head, pick a number of how many what percent started poor were still poor, right? And it was 14% in the last slide. You got a number in your head? Okay, go ahead, Rick. 5.1. 95% of the folks who started poor in 75 were out of poverty by 1990. Households were out of poverty by 1991. Okay? And it's worth, as I like to point out when I do this stuff, it's worth noting that this was over the course of those greedy, nasty 1980s, right, when nothing good happened in the world. It's also worth noting, by the way, the other end of the story here. If you started off wealthy, odds were you stayed wealthy. Right? 62% of those who started in the top 20% stayed in the top 20%. But the poor people keep moving up. And this usually leads to, I'm going to go back over here and stay now. This leads to, when I present this, people have a question. They say, well, wait a second. If all those poor people are getting richer, and all those rich people are staying richer, where are the new poor people coming from? Right? Somebody's poor. And the answer, of course, is new entrants to the labor market, right? Young people starting off for the first time, and immigrants, right? Who come in at the bottom of the income distribution, right? They're the ones who kind of fill in, and they slowly work their way up through the process as they age and get into better and better jobs and so on. And so we have this kind of cycle, this life cycle of income that people go through, where they start off poor, they get richer, new poor people come in and go through. And so sometimes people will say in response, well, okay, fine. So all you're showing here, really, is that people move up the income ladder over the course of their lifetime. Yes, that's what I'm showing. But that's exactly why you should be skeptical of that static comparison data that looks at 1 year and the other year. Because it's not the same people, right? People move through this process over the course of their lifetimes in a whole, in a variety of ways, and most of them move up. A couple other slides I want to show. Next one. This is that same University of Michigan data. Because they track individual households, what they can do is measure their income basically from year to year. And what this is that this, of the households who started off in the bottom 20% in 1975, in 1975, by the way, this is all adjusted for inflation, their average income of those poor households was about $1,200. Those exact same households, those same people, 16 years later, we're earning on an average $29,000. The folks who started wealthy in 75 were just over $50,000, and they were about $54,000 in 1991. So when you look at this data, what's the conclusion? Here's the conclusion I draw. Poor folks got a lot richer, rich folks got a little bit richer. But everybody got richer. And again, where's the poor folks? The poor folks are coming in again, through immigration and new entrants. And these are averages. It doesn't mean every household did better, right? But on average, poor households gained substantially. Rich households did better, okay, but not shockingly so. There's been some criticism of this data and the Treasury data, sort of kind of methodological, technical criticisms. So, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to show you two other sets of data, more recent data. They're not as nice as this, from my perspective. They're not as powerful from my argument, but they still are, I think, are confirming the basic point that income mobility is alive and well. So go ahead. This is some data between 1996 and 2005. Again, basically the same sort of thing. In this case, over that 9-year period, only a little over half of households moved up out of that lowest quintile. It's a little bit shorter period than the 75 to 91. It's about the same length as the 99 to the 79 to 88. And again, that number's higher. It suggests maybe that earlier data wasn't as powerful. There were issues with it. People have raised criticisms of this data, as you might imagine. Still, right, folks who started poor in 1996, over half of those households were out of poverty within 9 years. And some of them all the way up to the top. And you can see the same phenomenon here, right? If you started off wealthy, odds are you stayed wealthy. But it is worth noting that some folks, who started off in the upper 20% wound up in the lowest 20%, right? You can slide down. It can happen. And this next data is even more recent, 2001 to 2007. This is a brand new study about a couple months ago from the Minneapolis Fed. And this is, again, same sort of thing over the 6-year period from 2001 to 2007. So a little bit shorter period than the last one, but so we don't see quite as much mobility, right? About half, again, on the other side of half this way. But still, right, a fair number of folks moving up and out of poverty over that period. And when economists and the interesting thing here is this bottom line is just the fraction of households that left their quintile, right? So you can see almost, if we kind of average across all 5, pretty much it's half, right? People over a 6-year period, half the people are no longer in the same quintile that they started with. So there is significant income mobility in the United States economy, right? If you start poor, you're not necessarily stuck in poverty. And one of the ways, given that, okay, the other question we might want to ask that we can ask in terms of are the poor poorer? Okay, click one more. Minneapolis. We can ask is what do households have? What do people have in their households? I know that's a big blur of numbers up there. And let me explain to you what this is doing. This is from a Census Bureau survey that they do periodically, where they ask people, "What do you have these appliances in your home?" Okay, and the first 4 columns there are all people below the poverty line. This isn't even the 20%. This is below the poverty line in the United States, so it's even more interesting. How many of those households have these goods in them, right? And so those are percentages there. So say in 1984, 70% of poor people in the United States in 1984 had a color television in their house. Okay? 29.2 had a freezer. So 10 years later, you can see by 1994, right, most of those numbers are moving up. Okay? The VCR, of course, jumps dramatically, which goes back to the first myth, right? VCRs became dramatically cheaper, so people can afford them. The poor in 2003, again, these numbers continue to climb for the most part. Washing machine takes a little bit of a dive there, I'm not quite sure why. But almost all the other ones are about the same or higher than they were, and same with 2005. What I find most interesting is this column right here. Okay? That all 1971 column. That's the exact same data from all American, the average American household in 1971. And if you look and compare, right, you can see 2 things on either side of that. In 2005, looking at